Call the meeting to order. This is a workshop regarding the Restore Act.
Okay, yep, it is. This is our workshop. Bring everybody up to date, discuss some direction as to moving forward. Realize you can't make decisions here, but we can give some guidance as to which way to go. It's time to start cranking this thing up. There is some funds in our kitty from the Transocean settlement, and so therefore we need to start making some decisions. And at that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Cherie Keeler, and she's going to go up and get us started.
Everybody came out this rainy afternoon in a workshop. Okay, first of all, thanks for everybody for being here. And can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
And for approving the request to have the workshop. We've got some decision points that we need to make on the Restore Act so that we can access the funds. And so today, that's what I wanted to do, was just kind of bring to light those decision points for future agenda items at board meetings and workshops or whatever. And I'm only going to touch on just pot one of the money that's coming to Wakulla County. And then Byron Griffith and Cheryl Ulrich with Dewberry are going to speak about what they're doing for other counties. And they really have the knowledge on the Restore Act. And then Daryl, I can never say Daryl's last name correctly. Boudreaux from the TNC will speak about how they've been working with other counties in the Panhandle and the state to leverage other funds and in the Restore Act. So today, hopefully, what my presentation is going to do is just kind of set the table for moving forward and helping to facilitate making those decisions that need to be made so that we can access those funds that are available now and hopefully in the future. Which one? Yeah. Okay. So I know that you've seen this first slide before. I just wanted to have it in your handout just as a point of reference for you and the public. And as you can see, like I said, I'm going to focus on pot one, which is what's coming to Wakulla County. And today, in the bank, so to speak, at the Treasury, we have a little over $2 million that's available to Wakulla County. That is all of the Transocean money. There will be no more Transocean money. That's it. And that's what's available to us now. The BP settlement has not been reached yet, but I've asked the representatives from Dewberry, I want to call it Drewberry, but it's Dewberry, to speak a little bit about where the BP settlement is and some ideas about what could or could not happen with that. In your handout, you've got a copy of all the allocations to all the states and all the Florida counties so that you can see what the other counties are receiving and the states. As far as bucket two, which is the money that is supposed to come to the Gulf Consortium, the formula to allocate that money has not yet been determined. So as of today, the Gulf Consortium still doesn't have a number or budget identified, and hopefully that will be forthcoming. Let's go to slide 9 because I moved these around a little bit. On leveraging funds, we can leverage the Restore Act dollars.
Excuse me, when you're referencing your slides, is that part of this handout?
Yes, sir.
And
It should be right behind the agenda item.
Oh, okay, I got you.
On leveraging other funds, you can use the Restore Act dollars to our funds to leverage the other buckets as well as grants, but you do have to at some point know exactly how much and what the other funds are and what the projects are. So it's not...
So you basically can't leverage until you know what the other money is.
Exactly.
So
so there are a lot of things that have to work together, but you can get where you want to go.
So basically at this time leveraging is pretty much out of the question.
It is in one respect, but for instance, if we knew that we wanted to leverage our funds against the Gulf Consortium funds, and I can tell you, our presenters can explain this much better than I can, then we would say that we want to leverage, but we would at some point in a grant application have to identify the exact amount and the exact project. So it's constantly moving. It's very fluid. Yes, sir.
So when you're using the term leverage, could you explain that term?
Yes, leverage is when we take our money to double the amount of funds we get. Say, for instance, we want to do a project with like multiple counties around a watershed, and it would be in the best benefit of all the citizens to say we spend $1 million, maybe Gulf spends $1 million, Franklin spends $1 million, and we all leverage our funds together to get one project that would benefit all of us.
Now, are these projects basically just restoration of the environment, or can they be used for other things or whatever?
There's like 9 or 10 criteria, and we'll go over those in just a sec, because you're also going to have to prioritize those at some point. So let's go to the simplified. Okay. This is just a simplified process of how we access our funds. And what's going to happen is with each of the options, when we get to the decision points, whichever option you choose, there will be a decision tree that comes off of each one of these decision points in regards to how we prioritize, which projects we select, how we use the Restore Act Committee, and the use of a consultant.
And when you say the use of a consultant, tell me what you mean by that.
Sure.
You said the use of a consultant?
We're going to...
Okay, good enough.
I'm having a hard time finding my, can you go to decision points, transaction funds?
6.
One back from that. So one there.
Should be 6.
Okay. On the transaction funds, there's basically 4 options that I've tried to identify. The first option would be the county keeps all the funds and we spend it on a county-wide project, such as a master sewer plan, so that we could have plans, designs, etc., so that we could then apply for other grants for the actual construction. Because a lot of times, because we don't have construction-ready projects, it puts us at a disadvantage with other counties and municipalities around the state. Or option 2, you could say the county's going to keep a percentage of the money, and we're going to put a percentage of the money out for the public to recommend projects. I mean, that would be much like an RFP process that we go through when we select events. Different, but it's the same concept. Or option 3, well, I got those twisted, but the other option would be we put all the money out for public projects and let the public recommend projects. And then the 4th would be board direction if there's another way that you would like to go.
So those first 3 would be still board direction?
So to speak. But you might have a different, I might say board ideas.
Yeah. But none of those go without board direction?
Exactly. Because I have to document the process that we go through and how we came to all of our decisions, and a part of that is board direction in which way you would like for the county to move forward.
Now, I'm sure you're going to get to what we can do with the $2 million we got of the leverage. Are you going to get to that?
That was next. You just want to know, where's my money and how can I spend it?
And you're probably not going to like some of it.
Well, probably not.
Okay.
I do see that it said board direction, though. It didn't say administrative direction anyway.
Okay, and here's where we get to the good stuff for fun. these are the criteria that's actually in the Restore Act, and this is the areas that we have to spend the money. Okay, now you can have a little bit of leverage, a little bit of flexibility within each one of these criteria, but at the end of the day, it all has to come back to one or more of these 10. So that would also be another board direction, is are we going to focus on any one criteria, 2 criteria, or whatever. Now you can also set your criteria and then decide how you want to spend the money. So those two, there's not like a, one doesn't have to come before the other, but both of those at some point do have to be made. Then we have a Restore Act committee. They've been a great group. We haven't met because there really hasn't been anything to meet on. There was, no money until just recently. But all of these options, whichever way we go, we're going to have to decide how you want the Restore Act committee to come into play again. And that's probably going to have to be updating the ordinance that created them, because some of the things that they were charged to do really doesn't make sense anymore now that we have the Treasury rules. And so we would have to take a look at that. So I would also need board direction on how we reformat, restructure, maybe reappoint members, I don't know, with the Restore Act committee.
So those members on the committee, they could be or could not be still on the committee.
Mm-hmm. And then the fourth decision point is the multi-year plan and grant applications. The first option is we could piggyback on the Dewberry contract with Gulf County, and they also have a contract with Escambia and Pasco County to assist them with their multi-year plan and make sure that they get everything done correctly. And Franklin County is also doing an RFP right now to select a consultant, because it's a lot of work when you don't have a large staff to do these things. The second option is the county could do their own RFP and select a consultant. Option 3, county staff, also known as Cherie Keeler, could put together the multi-year plan with the assistance of our engineers such as Preble Rish and everything, because of the technical things that are required to do a grant application. And we'll also need Heather at the table because there's a lot of legal things that she's going to have to review and provide guidance on. And then again, board direction, there could be an idea or an option that I haven't thought of that you all might prefer.
Is that multi-year plan, is that for all the pots that come into us, or just, so it's a multi-year plan for all the Restore Act funds that may come to us?
Right, whether it's, and every county has to do it. If we do a plan for just the Transocean dollars and anything changes, you have to go through the entire process again of opening it up to public comment, reapplying to the Treasury. So anytime you change your multi-year plan, once it's been approved, it's like you're starting all over again, almost.
Our consultant contract, would that be for the entire period, or can that be changed?
Well, I'm going to, Dewberry's here today, and they're going to talk about what they're doing in the Gulf County so that they can, I think they can better explain how they're working and what the options are than I can. All right, is that all the questions you have of me? I'm going to turn it over. I'm ready to sit down and let somebody else drive.
Is this when we applaud?
Sir?
Is this the point we applaud?
Yes. Thank you. Oh, and I did tell them that I had the best commissioners of any county in Florida.
There you go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Brian Griffith. I'm Vice President with Dewberry. Regional location for my home base is actually over in Gulfport, Mississippi, but I handle all 5 states. In that location, we have offices throughout Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas.
You'll have to speak into that microphone. I'm a little bit old.
Oh, no problem. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon, and I'll be honest with you, Cherie did say that. So you're on the hook to show me that you're the best commissioners in the Gulf counties of Florida. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. You are running a workshop style. There's no decisions. It's all informative. I hope I'm going to demonstrate to the team is prepared to really candidly answer questions. Some of them will be structural about the Treasury process, and really standing up here to really inform your knowledge going forward in this workshop to the maximum extent possible. We are in a privileged position to be leading many of the efforts in this regard in Florida and elsewhere. So we have a lot of basis of experience to draw from in your questions and answers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Prior to joining Dewberry, I actually spent over 30 years as a federal executive. In fact, I was the Gulf region lead for over 20, handling all of the handling the major federal planning and grants development and administration processes upon which most of these are structured in the Transocean settlement. I had lead with the administration on the response to Transocean in the task force. So I have a lot of grounded experience now, 3 years in the private sector with Dewberry to draw on as well. So what I'd like to do is give you just a very simple, and it's a highly simplified presentation, but a general overview about what the path looks like, and it is a bit of a blueprint. A little bit of background on the multi-year implementation plan, as Cherie said. Every county from Brownsville, Texas to Monroe must produce one of these in some shape, fashion, or form and be approved by Treasury to access your resources. But they are your resources, and so it's a doorway to them, lacking any better definition than that. But in the end, they are your resources. They never expire, and ultimately can be used in a lot of fashions, as will be shown by the 10 eligible classes of expenditure that Cherie put up. I will be honest with you. I'll be very candid. You would have a harder time on what is known as the direct component, your share of the Transocean monies, finding what you couldn't spend the money on rather than what you could. It's really designed to be as flexible as possible for the county to. You'll see it's structured in categories. The federal government looks at this region like it does anyone else, and it tried to think forward in both the statute and the Treasury regs on what are the most frequent requests for assistance going forward in this environment, right? Infrastructure, everything from hard infrastructure all the way down to the ecological and the environment, and not try to pigeonhole you into those, but to get you to think a little bit more directly about also what's behind that and the opportunities it would present you. And I'll get back to your leveraging question in a moment about what leverageability that might have so you can magnify those resources. It's one shot in time. So if you would, or I guess I actually have control, don't I? Let's try this. Perfect. So today we actually have 4 members, well, 3 of the direct members of the PREP team. I've got Cheryl Ulrich. Cheryl is a nationally renowned restoration specialist out of Jacksonville. She's with Dewberry, and she would serve as the project manager, should that be the opportunity with Wakulla. She has a wealth of experience, and we're talking about the navigability of all those federal programs, inclusive of the permitting with the Corps and other things, has over 10 years experience with the Corps. Also have Paul Johnson with E&E. E&E is a principal subcontractor of ours on these efforts, bringing us a gateway into many of the science questions. You'll see prominently featured in the regs that intent to have you really explore the best available science component to make sure to the maximum extent possible you place your money where it's going to get the best bang, with some resolute mind that it actually have the best chance for success in the final analysis of going forward. So that's who's represented here today. We're a much larger group than that, of course, and our qualifications stand everything from the largest of possible infrastructure that you could imagine down to the permitting and science components that could come forward. We are a multi-year implementation team expert. I would represent us that way, not the least of which is my background, but the fact that we have been in parallel with the development of the Treasury regs. I want to step aside a little bit, if I may, in the course of this discussion and give you some parallels to some of those early questions. Companies, we're not the only company, but companies like ours have to invest heavily in a process that's still moving. Treasury is handling these funds for two of the component pots, the direct component and what's known as the state component, or and in that regard, all of these funds will be presented to the counties, or in the state's case, the state, as grants. Treasury is not a granting agency or department. It has not been in the past. It is not in their, it's just not a part of their sweet spot in terms of what it is they do. The fact of the matter is Treasury is best known for its audits and its capacity for monetary control in post-audit instances. But in this particular case, the manner in which the statute was written put Treasury front and center. Lacking any better definition of what happened there, Treasury actually had to build a grant program to stand this operation up. They're all custom to begin with in some respects, but they had to build it up for this particular process. And as you've seen how long it took to get the Treasury regulations out and into the actual aspects of what's happening today, it is still a process in motion. And the only reason I point that out is you have to have the capacity to stay on top of that constantly moving target so that you don't get outside the compliance boundaries and get wrapped up in what could be trouble later. And the trouble comes in many forms. It's just a nuisance, if nothing else, in slowing down your process. And that is just genuinely not usually in the customary background of counties, and I will tell you, large or small. It's not what you do every day. And so, that's one of the prospects of what we get. Leveraging to achieve county's vision. I'm going to show you a little bit directly about that, and we'll talk some more about that leveraging capacity in a minute. So I told you who we are. We also have on staff the University of West Florida Haas Center. The reason we have them is, I'll just project forward the process. So any way you look at a process like this, we have multiple projects involved. You have multiple competitors. Even internally, you have multiple competitors. And so one of the weights and balances that's often sought from our clients in that competition is benefit cost, return on investment impacts, and we use the Haas Center's environmental programs and environmental models assistance in basically being able to present those findings back to you so that you know whether you're weighing apples or oranges against comparative projects. Okay. Go a little bit past that. So it's really winds up being a 6-step process when you stop and think about it. 5 primary steps. The first step is the planning grant. Your money positioned with Transocean right now, the first element of it that's directly accessible by you is planning assistance funds. So, and the other thing about what Cherie said, I'll give you a little bit more characterization of the uniqueness of these resources, Transocean and ultimately BP, is not only are they completely openly eligible for leveraging, but they're completely eligible to be used at 100%. So, when you have a defined scope of work, if those resources are available to you, you can use them at 100%. You do not have to put general fund resources into it at all. Okay. So the effort that we're involved in with all of our counties right now is, of course, scoping the planning grant. So the Treasury turn around and park that, and that is in a grant, so park that grant with the county and ultimately eligible to be drawn down on as the process is performed against. Once we're involved in that, really, to be honest with you, the first step involves scoping steps 2 through 6. And that's where we simply define how the organization of approach, the involvement, which I could not overstate the intent in the language of the Act and the Treasury rules for demonstrative public involvement, that it does actually represent Wakulla or any other county's plan from the standpoint of that representation and the consensus building behind it. The development of the project selection criteria. There are admitted, there's a wide array in these 2 things I'm going to define to you, but there are 2 basic camps here. One is you could decide that, all right, we're going to, as I think one of those options was, we're going to see what everyone thinks is the thing to do, right? That is a very difficult, I'm going to advocate a little bit on my experience. That is a very difficult environment to manage because you set up unbelievable, unguided expectation that way. And it's already been done numerous times across the Gulf region, and I would promise you that every one of them wish they had not done that. Because it's just simply that. There's no categorization. There's no, this is the hill we want to take going down the road in the future. So now you have to wait and balance a lot of great ideas, and there's no question about the ideas being great, but how do you wade your way through that process? Down to defining within relative degrees of accuracy your scope. This is where I think Sheree was asking you earlier. What does the county see as the proposition for this down the road, and the areas of influence it would best have, the areas of attack, are the things that are either opportunities you want to move on aggressively or impediments you want to remove from some of your key problems in that project scope. Well, that's a very definitely different definition, where you're laying down the goals and objectives. And therein, before you go out on a project call, you actually have a defined set of goals and objectives. So then you're getting the ideas in here in project form that are the best ones to really channeled towards getting you furthest and best positioned in that particular case. Two very different environments there. Right. Well, even in that regard, you have the projects that will come in, and they need to be screened for you. All of this process, by the way, is nothing more than facilitative. It's informed consent for the board, county board. You are the only one the government recognizes as the grantee here. It's your grant, it's your funds, and so it's an informed structure as to what is the best and highest use for your funds. So in that regard, as professional services contractors, those of us that do that, we would screen them based on your criteria agreements, so that when they're presented to you, they're presented in the form to be the best candidates, defensively. Because, right, you got more than you can do, so you have lines that have to be drawn, a defensible characterization of what is the best and highest use. It is not a definitive list. It does not say fund projects 1 through 10. That is not what a board does, and that's not what the structure does. It brings the pool of best capacity to you at the table, and then that is basically worked down to the point where you're comfortable moving ahead with what represents your idea of multi-year plan, and that term really needs to be thought about. Multi-year implementation plan. To be honest with you, you will take on some projects that will prove likely. I'm just telling you in the grander characterization thing. You'll take up on some projects that you would never want to repeat because they will be experiments. You're likely to experiment moving the ball faster in Wakulla County in some of these regards with some risk. And they will prove to be not so good. And you'll have the other end of that is you'll have some projects that you will have taken on that will prove to be unbelievably successful. And had you known that they would be that successful, you may have chosen to scale them up much larger because of the result economically and or otherwise that it would bring the county. You see I'm getting that? So under a multi-year plan, and the other reason it's going to be a multi-year plan is even it is highly likely, and it's probably more unlikely, that BP's settlement will be paid out in one lump sum. It will be paid out over years in profits, likeliest. Like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's component of the Transocean settlement, probably 5 years, or in a range in that regard. So it will come down in increments to Wakulla County to pull down on your multi-year plan, the next set of projects coming up. So as I stage these future scenarios for you, you're going to be working projects at one scale of money that you already have, waiting on the next increment to come in, and you're going to have results, and you're going to get the chance to see what those results are and where to begin to modify that structure. So the development project intake process, we have to match every environment that we work in, but this is both between the written form and portal-based applications for your project framework. A lot of work goes into this structure. The last thing that you want to do is be going repeatedly out to applicants and saying, oh yeah, I forgot to get this from you, or I forgot to get that from you. You want to make it highly professional and make sure that you take to the maximum extent possible one pass by the applicant so that they're on equal footing to be evaluated against one another. Develop the project priority. This is what I was saying earlier. Once you've screened those against your criteria, screen those against your eligibility, screen those against the other factors that you have in there, then the county really has its hard work to do, and that's getting down to the best and final. We do this repeatedly in counties because there's a lot of people think, okay, you're going to define 1 through 10. Well, that's just not the case. Because the county is going to inculcate this kind of data, and you're going to look across your districts, you're going to look across many factors, and you're going to make some final modifications, but within that structure, the defensible structure, to give yourself a representative multi-year implementation plan. So that makes sense? But the stage is literally serial. I don't want you to think it isn't, because you really do have to have the foundation footing down in each case to be able to move to the next one. Now, and I'll come back to something Cherie said, Restore advisory committees are a common framework, whether they're structured right or not, is a consequence of really looking at, as she said, the way the Treasury rules have now come down in final and this whole component strategy going forward. There's a level of homework that has to be done by committee members, and we're in some counties where some of those representatives are rethinking whether they're up for that kind of homework or not. And so consequently, but this is the advisory group. Now, whether it would be the same in Wakulla is up to Wakulla, but usually the professional services structure obviously belongs to the county, but it's advisory to the advisory group, and the advisory group under consensus brings a recommendation to you. And so, we work the committee, so to speak, in that particular regard. But it's the committee is an excellent structure, positioned correctly, with people that have the level of commitment that they can apply to it and be representative, obviously, of the many stakeholders that you have in the county that best fits. We were asked recently, what's the right size? There's no magic size, but I would tell you one that's too big is too big, because they can't get to the job. So I'd just offer around 10 or less is about the right size. So I'm just going to walk through this pretty quickly. These are standards of performance that are, in some cases, like the planning grant, works in progress in real time. Treasury has received very few of these, some from us. They have not worked them. There was a recent announcement that I believe Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana had the first one out. They asked for one thing. Actually, they didn't go for a planning grant application. They went for the multi-year implementation plan. They want a plan in the multi-year implementation plan. So, Treasury awarded that. But in this particular process, Treasury has now, as I said before, it made up the rules. It sent them out there for a test. People are testing it. They're finding aspects of it that are a little uncomfortable, and so they're modifying the rules a bit. But they're, to their own credit, they've put some standards of performance on themselves, basically about 6 weeks, that they are saying they will meet their obligation to turn these applications for the planning structure around.
If you don't mind, repeat that again about Plaquemines Parish. They're using the planning money to create the plans, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. So they're actually using the preponderance of their resources to create a plan.
Right.
And if I may, just a moment, because I know an awful lot about Plaquemines, that's not a bad move on their part, because Plaquemines is in a position where Plaquemines won't exist tomorrow. Their problems are large. They're going to vanish. And so their component use of this money, they must, I didn't write it, they must feel, is to get their story told in the form and in a way that people recognize this isn't for fun and games. They won't exist tomorrow unless certain things are undertaken for them.
Why not?
They're washing into the Gulf. Subsidence and the stemming of the river, they literally won't exist tomorrow if certain things aren't. I'm not sure they can actually. I shouldn't say that. It's open to it. They got a challenge of tantamount proportions ahead of them. Louisiana considers itself a working coast because it's constantly changing. As I said before, and this I'll tell you right out, and Cherie, no matter which option they choose, this is the one that is the toughest for the Restore advisory committees, because this puts them on point to come to consensus on what the evaluation framework is going to be for projects. And it kind of was fluffy up to this point and fun, but now they're on point to have to come down to that decision, because this will actually structure the application. you know, to keep it fair and open, everybody has to know what targets they're shooting against. And this is where we've seen some stress on the advisory committees come into play. And again, as I said before, this is where it's an administration, all this is an administration process, it's pretty clear to you. But this is the administration of the project call, the compliance structure within it, make sure everyone stays in it, everyone gets their questions answered, that their applications are elevated to be as best they possibly can so they're evaluated properly against each other and all of that. And then finally, as I said, you have an eligibility review. The last thing you would want to see to properly inform the board is actually bring projects that you might actually gravitate right to, only to learn later on you could have never funded them to start with. You know, so there's a lot of machinations that have to go through the process of the review. And then finally, and I really want to bring this home, so you do venture into, ultimately the goal is to put your multi-year implementation plan in place so that you can get at your resources. And today that's a little over $2 million in your Transocean settlement. The street wisdom has it, you know, BP has navigated all of its basic primary appeals processes. And right now, conventional wisdom has it around 13 to 14 or $13.6 billion is their exposure on the penalty phase. So collectively, you're talking about in Wakulla just a little north of, if that were to play out, just a little bit north of 30 million that would represent your fund, if you will, that you're developing a multi-year implementation plan against. With the Transocean settlement, there's absolutely, I mean, I know there's a lot of speculation. There really should not be any I could understand why you'd speculate on timing. There's not any speculation on whether those resources are coming to you. The penalty phase has already been, the penalty structure redistribution has already been apportioned in statute to come to the county. I'll take a sidebar with that many years in the federal government. I would offer to you that 2016 is BP's best settlement year. They will not want to leave an administration and go into another one and get into a start over. Whether that plays out or not, obviously is played out in the courts, but they have way too much vested and way too much appeal process behind them. So if they did that, it would be classically to leave the devil you know rather than the one you don't. And I just would offer to you that 2016 is going to be the likeliest process for that.
So when they, let's just make the assumption they settle in 16. So the money that we possibly would get would be set into an account somewhere.
Yes, sir.
And then we start doing our system on that money.
I would reverse it the other way. This is my recommendation to you, no matter what option you take. You should build the basis of your planning on 13.6 billion right now. Until you see that number change, that's what you should build it on. And the only reason that is to give you a backcast about the relative range of the resources that you will have at Wakulla's disposal.
Well, I was talking about 30 million. We're not going to get 13 billion.
No, you're not going to get 13 billion. Of the whole settlement, you will get 30 billion. Not 30 million, 30 billion. Wish we were getting 30 billion. I bet you do too. Yes.
But we do our planning based on the 30 million.
That's my recommendation highly to you.
It went by me that you said 13 billion, and I knew that wasn't.
Yeah. So that's the formula. It sets up the trickle down that ultimately gives you your distribution.
Forgive me for coming in late, but all the selection criteria you were mentioning, the portal and all that's assuming that we open this projects up to non-county projects, I guess, right? That's really up to us.
I think in some shape, fashion, or form, it may be a lot smaller grouping or a lot tighter control. You would really run the same model.
Even if they're all county infrastructure projects, if that's what we decide to do, whatever.
I would anticipate you'd have some way to even compare those against each other.
We just went through this on the CRTPA, by the way. There's 2040 mobility plan where you first set the criteria, then you run the projects through this model. Basically, it's still subjective to say the least, because you can, that was my background.
100% agree with you. It's subjective up to the point of informing the pool. Ultimately, the final pool is decided by you. Yeah, it's just a corralling with defense, corralling structure. But so I want to come back to the leverage, and you were asking about when can you leverage and should leverage. And that goes a lot to my the background of the rest of my experience. The federal programs, let's just assume as some of your water resource or hard infrastructure programs, you have, as you know today, you have multiple federal programs that would like to come work with you on some of those. Some of them are somewhat competing. They don't have the same grant percentage distributions. Rural development might be 65-35, another one might be 50-50. It's a lot of scenarios. But within that pool, because your resources are 100% usable for eligible local match, then you're in the catbird seat, obviously, to take maximum advantage.
How do you allocate that in a plan, though?
This way.
What Dick Cheney says, there's some things you know, and some things you don't know. So let's say 5 years from now, we have a grant opportunity, David, to expand the wastewater plant to $5 million, and that's not in this plan that we prepared now. How does...
Well, I would presume, if I was going to use that as carry the example forward, I presume today you knew that the plant was potentially an operational, meeting its operational performance limits, and as an infrastructure project, it would be high, but it may be 5 years out, or a number of years out. As you know, I'm sure many of those grant programs are also years out, and the county has to take its position. The positioning would put you in, and I do this a lot, I have this very same conversation. So what you have is a strategy basis here within your multi-year implementation plan. This infrastructure is in decay, whatever got you to that point. You may want to apportion you don't have it in hand yet. You may want to apportion a commitment of a portion of those funds, if they're in hand, to apply to rural development, EPA, whatever, or HUD, or whoever is the grant opening that you're after. That is, as you know, it's a multi-year cycle to even get the grants reviewed. You never are obligated until you go to the signature table on the grant. So you're going to play some of these funds against each other on the bet that they're going to arrive on time. But if you did not, so the converse of that is true as well. If you were not in that position, then you're 2 years out, 2 to 3 years out to even be in the play on the big grants. And yes, sir.
Is there a time frame that these projects have to be completed within?
No, sir. None whatsoever. That's what I said. That's going to be largely political pressure on the Wakulla County Commission, but your resources remain yours until they're expended. And so that really kind of sets up a great question. It kind of sets up the need to really think about the impetus behind a strategy, to magnify them, and do it systematically so that you're going after the things that you know you want to change Wakulla in or around as a consequence of the one-time opportunity. Monies like this don't ever come. They just do not come in federal programs. So I'll show you a set of slides that I used to try to represent this recently, because as I said before, this is largely what I've done most of my career. So within, and it could have been any nature of the three, these are the three primary components in the restore that where it's anticipated that we gravity on the part of the boards to find infrastructure, ecological, or economic recovery projects. If you thought about it structurally in terms of your applications now, from the previous questions, your application pool might not look anything like this, 100, or it might look a lot larger. I don't know which avenue you take, but regardless, you're going to have applications against your base. And the other thing about it, the additive value is going to be much higher than your base. So, you know, we were just dealing with Gulf County moving into operation last week. They put out the general project call, and although Cheryl wasn't there, I was. As I recall, it's about $150 to $160 million in the base to go against basically a $30 million, you know, $30 to $35 million allocable pool. Well, what do you do with that kind of pent-up demand and expectation beyond, you know, certainly want to leverage and magnify because you want to have higher reach. All those are good projects, right? Higher reach into that. So that would be characteristic of this. When you look at how to solve your problems, you have a lot of great ideas. Some of them can take them further than you anticipated, and that would be great if you could, right? So now it becomes a business plan. How do you move best on the best possible aspects of the projects that you have? Well, you have, I know it's represented lightly here, so you have direct and indirect. You have Restore Pot 3, which of course is the state expenditure plan. Now, as Sheree said, the allocation of the final formula has not been set, but it's relatively stable enough that the consultant group is already beginning to use the same formula. You might be looking at 30 point something million. They'll be looking at a larger figure for the state. The main thing is they got to look at that from a planning perspective as to where to get the best and highest use. Well, that's one of the leverage points you would certainly want here in Wakulla. For the other, and it's going to attract, because I can promise you about the Pot 3 funds, they're going to be more regional. They're going to look to regional cross-boundary initiatives. So when she said maybe we do something with Gulf, maybe we do something with Franklin, those are going to be the kinds of propositions that are going to come out of that structure, because they're going to be a smaller number of projects, more regional in scope, and more direct, larger geography effect. And you have the capacity to amp that up based on where it shows. You have the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the NRDA processes are still in motion, and the projects there have been going on in absence of you having knowledge about where you are going, where you would want to go with your own resources or your own initiatives and priorities. I shouldn't make that so boundaryless in that statement, but it would largely portend you do not have a planning structure in which somebody could see the connectedness between your springs protection or your infrastructure improvements to know where they would connect with these other.
Making the assumption of where we want to go.
Yes, sir. Exactly. So that's pretty fraught with a likely degree of a lot falling through the cracks, right? So in that respect, a component of these projects in the other state and federal are going to be matchable. Now, it does not say that this does not come without complexity, because it's certainly complex. I'm not going to ever tell you that it isn't. But the end game is enormous for Wakulla. When I ran the Gulf region for 2 decades, we literally imagined just such a day as this, because the Gulf region was largely known as the red-headed stepchild in the nation. Pacific Northwest, the Northeast, and the Great Lakes corridors, they politically blocked and tackled much better than we did. And largely it would take an incident just like this to begin to bind the opportunities up to where you could even consider a model like this, because you're half subsidized, right? So we could only imagine planning structures that would have made a statement about Wakulla, about these are the opportunities and the impacts that they are trying to effectively address, to know where to draw these other resources from. Truth be told, when Restore is done properly in this or any other county, Restore will be forgotten largely years from now, and the residual attention drawn by the other programs and carrying you to the end point will long overwhelm the Restore dollars. They will, because they've been looking for a cooperator like this for a long period of time. And then your state expenditure plan, as I pointed out in Pot 2, oops, I'm going to go past that. You're getting into, as I said before, the key ingredient in federal, state, and frankly, public-private partnerships, and that's a business plan. You're going to come out of this activity with a business plan for Wakulla. And it's going to be highly attractive, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of options dealing at this table, done right. So.
We decide we want to do Project A. Do we send out the bids for the people who do Project A, or do you send out the?
I can answer that in a number of ways. I think you had a more contextual basis to your question, and if I don't get it right, you just take me further. Okay. So a lot of people wonder if the project award is the end. So you choose Project A, and John Doe submitted Project A. And so is John Doe the recipient of the project, or do you go through a specification package for your procurement shop and you go out on the street for Project A? I think that was your question. And I want to make sure you all are paying attention to what I'm telling you. Okay. The federal government will recognize Wakulla County for every one of these projects. The liability will never leave you.
There doesn't have to be a John Doe, though. was my
There
point
doesn't
earlier.
have to be a John Doe.
We could be
Yes.
committee, we could be the Restore Act Committee, right?
Well, you could certainly be the Restore Act Committee. I'm taking you down a scale of resolution down to your procurement shop, okay? So your procurement and execution to close out an audit, you want to be careful how much risk you put out there, getting this too far from the county procurement shop. A lot of people are talking about sub-grants because they think it's just a pass-through. There's nothing about this that's a pass-through.
We've been explaining this at length from
So is every
staff.
all the
Yeah.
counties are coming to the realization that
Yeah.
sending it out private is just not going to
You know, we got all these
work.
groups that come up with these, I want
Yeah.
money for this project, whatever it is, I don't know, whatever it is. We have to go into this with our eyes open, realizing we're responsible for that money. If they don't do what they said they were gonna do, or if they somehow mishandle it, they're gonna come back and look at Wakulla, not at that person.
That is 100% correct.
So I think we should keep them all in the county, myself. That's my personal opinion.
When you say keep them all in the county,
The Wakulla County projects. In other words, if some nonprofit group forms and says, we're, whatever, Wakulla Countyans for artificial reefs, we want to submit this grant to build these artificial
Well, I
reefs.
understand.
We're a nonprofit organization,
Yeah.
Wakulla, please bless us, and they go out and they start building artificial reefs, and they say, well, we don't really want to do this, or either they can't provide an audit trail for every piece of concrete. When they audit that project, they're going to say, Wakulla, they don't have good enough things, you need to refund $50,000.
I got you, but now, where he stands though, we would be doing that. We would keep it in the county.
It's our decision.
So we're having this dialogue because no one has received, with the exception of Plaquemines, who are off to their plan, no one has received the project level funds yet, okay? So the careful and compelling decision before you here is on the procurement. It does not mean you couldn't reach Shellfish Growers LLC. You would do it in the form of a contract for them to do a specific piece of work if they were so competitively chosen. The question is who administers, cradle to grave,
We need to
the
do
risk.
that. We're the ones
Yeah.
responsible in the end.
We have to figure out what you do. Is your position basically to take us through all the regulatory processes and help us obtain the money? Is that where you go? It's sort of like buying a car. I buy a car, I've got $30,000 for the car, and then when I get ready to sign the papers, it's $36,000 because of tax tag and title.
Right.
And bumper stickers and stuff. So
Where do we start and stop?
where do you,
I'm going to assume that I can answer them as candidly as, or ask and answer as candidly.
we're big guys.
Yeah. We have the expertise to get you right into this multi-year implementation plan exactly the way that you need to be, so it's no surprises your $36,000 car costs $36,000. That's the car you want. We also have the expertise. We have a high, one of our primary roles nationally in some of the most complex grants programs is full compliance implementation. We can carry you through the entire life cycle if you should so want that kind of professional service. In doing so, you need to understand what a contractor in that regard is bidding. That contractor is bidding never to be in your project, is to be your professional services contractor. We understand that. We are fully capable of doing projects as well. But we have our business model here is to get you all the way through this process and to retire, if that's the second question. If you wanted us to, we can help you retire these all the way to full closeout.
Okay. When we go forward, we need 10 new people to accommodate what we're going to be doing.
Mhm.
5 new people. So we basically bypass those 5 people and you do that work for us.
Here's what I would say is fair to that. This guy would not have the discussion with your county staff. You just need to understand my response to your question, okay? When your staff looks at the model, there is a percentage of administrative fee that each project carries, 7% cap, okay? And you can consider obviously either having the staff do it, because that's the position that the county administrator is confident and comfortable with, and he sells you on that, some hybrid of it, because there's always going to be a hybrid of it. It's really the county procurement staff, and so you want to use a portion to have 2 more people in the audit or contracting and specs controls environment, or subcontract even a larger portion. But in either respect, even that is a business decision within the range of the resources that you have available to you to make sure you do it well for the county, because your statement is exactly right. The last thing you want to do is see the refund statements come in from the federal government, and that will be unpleasant.
So we have a 7% cap administration fee and all this money.
Yes, sir. Well, and that's on the project implementation side.
I thought it was 3.
No. Well, it's 3% administratively internally. There's 7% within a project, and you can work those together. You know, you still got to take a project to close out.
Break that down for us separately then.
So you have a 3% administrative cap. In other words, if you didn't do anything, you got 3% that the county administrator's got to figure out he's got to work in. And then you have, as I recall, around a 7% cap within the project to deal with administration, project administration.
That would be you.
Yes, sir.
Or it could be the regional
It could
planning
be.
council.
It could be a combination of the 2.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's got to be the economic formula that works best
So
for us.
basically, if we take the 3%, right now it wouldn't come out of our general budget necessarily because we're going to get the 3%, so it's not an additional cost to us.
No, but he's got to manage a lot of widgets within the 3%.
Right. It's
So that's
refundable money.
Yes,
up
sir.
to the 3%.
Yes, sir.
So I have several questions. One, have we retained this consulting firm?
No, we haven't.
Okay. So I'm hearing that you feel very confident that Wakulla County is going to be allotted $30 million.
Give or take, I'm very confident
Right.
in that range. Yes, sir.
And what I'm hearing right now, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
is that you have a consulting fee sort of generally to get things moving along and get these projects identified and all this pre-system. And then there's the actual time when the projects are actually picked, and that could, if we choose to go with your firm and turn over that administrative fee, or have your firm do that and receive the administrative fee, that's like a 7% item.
Right.
So 7% of $30 million for the projects, but what is coming before that?
So you have 3%. So you have the 3%.
Explain that a
just-
little better, would you?
Yes.
Let's assume, for now, if you would, to simplify it, we know we're getting $2 million. So let's just use $2 million. What does the 3% go to? Making the plan?
No, 3% and the plan have no relevance to one another.
Okay.
Right, so
You're-
those are part, so let me see if I still understand this. There's percentages that are in these allocations for the projects.
Mhm.
That's the 3% and the 4% that adds up to the 7% if it goes to closure.
Well, let me, since we're going to play this, and remember
Okay,
that
but then the other part of my question is, and I know you have it, is the sort of getting us in this process thing, is that also an additional cost to the county?
So the multi-year implementation plan is to get you in the process. You've got to log it, get it approved by Treasury, so that you can get your money. That's the in the process. It has nothing to do with those percentage fees or not.
Correct.
Even within that fee, you have the 3% to the county. There's a lot of administration, obviously at the county level. When you move the ball forward, and it actually follows its own, it's like water, right? You're going to go to Treasury and say, because you have an approved plan, you're going to go to Treasury and say, I'm logging my application for Project 5 now, right? Project 5 is X value, and Treasury sends that value in an approved grant down to you. That starts the action on full life cycle execution. Now I want to come back to something else. So even within the 3%, or 7, I mean the whole package of the administrative fee, you asked me about Preble. I would imagine your county engineer would be front and center helping you write specs. That would not be the best and highest use. We would definitely consult on that if they want us to, but your best and highest use is to play all your parts against those percentages. The full compliance structure, your grants administration system and everything else, and your audit, and your quarterly reports, and your annual report to Treasury, and reconciliation, all that's a whole different animal altogether. So within all of that confines, We are supplemental to your capacity, as would be any firm that you would offer up. The thing that you should probably feel the most comfortable with, and maybe I hope I can express this properly, is whether those numbers, they're chosen, right? They're pre-chosen, 3s and 7s and all of that. Within that business model, you got to manage within it, right? So you have a lot of flexibility to manage within that structure, and I'm sure that's where the county, separate and apart from us, would step away from it and see that's what you'd best do.
So pursuing this, before we get to the projects, getting us to the point of those projects, what do you anticipate? I'm looking at the $30 million, and I want to try to figure out how much is going to be left of the $30 million that we can actually spend.
So
I'm taking...
I'm going to answer your question
Yeah.
absolutely honestly.
I expect no other.
Yes, sir. If you took one of the options, the easiest one for me to get down the numbers on, if you took one of the options that Sri put up, if you piggybacked the Gulf County contract, which was just signed, okay, the value of that contract is a little over, that's the full multi-year implementation plan process I mentioned, is a little over, it's around $350,000. That would be 1.1% of your anticipated, it's obviously more than 1.1% of your Transocean, but it'd be 1.1% of your $30 million. The reason I think, I would hope, and as did they and others, you would find that very attractive, is normally planning is done about 5 to 7%, and we will bring that in at 1.1, 1.2% to do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask, David, do you understand all this?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain it to me in soft choppy terms, please? Starting from today, where we sit.
I can do that for you.
All right, we've got to have a,
Wait, Smith Creek term.
Yeah.
we'll do this in Sop Choppy and Smith
Well,
Creek
Stop
term.
Choppy will cover two of them. Yeah.
Remember, I came in late, but you can summarize it.
Okay,
I
we've
catch
got to
on.
have, we're starting the process now that we have money in the bank. Okay, we've got
$2 million.
some money in the bank. We've got to, one of the first things we have to do is...
Can I jump in one comment,
Yes.
because he missed it. We're thinking about the $2 million, but we've got to have the implementation plan for the whole project.
And he's assuming we're going to get it, and we're going to assume we're going to get it, so I got that.
Yeah.
That's Ivan, East Ivan there. So anyway, we've got the $2 million in the bank. What we've got to do, the first thing before we can get to those funds, is we have to have a multi-year plan written, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we got to submit that to the Treasury.
Now, how do we form that plan?
So we've got, that's part of what's going to be our job. What they bring to the table is they work with Preble Rish.
Okay.
Them and Preble Rish are together. They bring to the table the ability to help us create that multi-year program.
They help create the plan.
They help create that because they can put it in terms that will allow us to leverage not only our pot, but pots 2 and 3.
Now, let's back up 1 second.
And
when we're coming up with the plan,
Right.
obviously we got to have projects to put in the plan.
Right.
My point was how we pick that projects is either with a Restore Act committee, which I don't like,
That's what he
or
just said, though.
the board can pick those projects because we're answerable to the
Well,
voters.
you're jumping way ahead here.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so what we're going to come back to the board and say, hey, on pot one money, what do you want to do? It's going to be real simple. Do you want to put this out to the public and let anybody come in and bring a project in, or do we want to spend it on sewer?
Pot one's the $30 million.
The pot one right now is the $2 million.
Right,
all
but
right?
it's- we anticipate
So
it's
for right
gonna be
now, what do we want to do? All right, obviously it's going to be, we'll use it for county infrastructure. All right, now, then we're going to say, all right, now though, we want to engage like the oyster program, the artificial reef, etc. We want to engage, we got to write a program that says pots 2 and 3. We want to go to work with Gulf County and Franklin County and work together with them to Wakulla becomes a part of it, using our portion of the funds 2 and 3.
Haven't we already discussed, and I think given board direction, that we want the pot one money to be used only for like infrastructure
Not
projects?
really. I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
But
Go ahead.
But so anyway, we're going to come back. It'll be that'll be the first one will be a real easy decision. Then we'll come back and say, okay, we want to work in a regional aspect to go after pots 2 and 3, and that's gonna be whatever that is, you know,
Now, we can't.
stormwater, oysters, artificial reefs, whatever, okay? Now, all right, let me finish that. All right, what they'll do is that they will help us write that. Not only will they help us write it, but they're also doing these other plans for everybody, so they can pull it all together. All right, and also what they'll do is they will be able to say, this grant program is available, now you can take some of these funds in Part 1, and if you want infrastructure at Wakulla Gardens, we'll help you help you write a grant, help you with this. and
Separate charge for that.
That's right. Well, we'd have to work all that out.
Well,
And
that could be somebody else.
They bring that to the table, and then also they'll help us with that procurement and helping get those funds and put that project in to the Treasury so that we can get those funds.
But they're not asking for an exclusive contract to do all that. If we decide we want to use somebody else to bird dog a grant,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. The main thing we need them for is initially is
Make the
write our
plan.
plan, and also biggest thing is for pots 2 and 3 to marry those up with within the region so that we can maximize the money coming to Wakulla County, and then also let them help us with leveraging some of our Pot 1 money, because we need to, you know, what he's saying is right. This Pot 1 money, if we leverage it right, could be 30, 40 years before it's all spent,
let me finish.
if we leverage it
Can
right.
you change the plan? Once we adopt the plan, it's approved by the Treasury,
Yes.
can you change it?
Yeah, you're just gonna recycle the plan, though. You're gonna expense a good bit of overhead.
Our consultants can be changed.
And our consultants will be changed.
Right.
If they don't do a good job, we'll get rid of them and get somebody else, or whoever.
We can change the consultants whether they do a good job or not.
Right.
I'm the board's liaison on the Restore Act Committee, and he was right, that one of the most stressful things that the Restore Act Committee's been trying to do was trying to establish the criteria of how do we rate the projects and that's very stressful.
Now, you're on that committee?
Yeah, I'm the board's liaison on the Restore Act Committee.
But, you know, I think there is a place for the Restore Act Committee for sure, and I think we need to utilize the Restore Act Committee. But we first off, we need some help, especially if we got a big slug coming down the line. We need some help to draft that plan correctly so that we're in step. My biggest things I worry about, I want to make sure I'm in step with what's going on with other counties.
Which is more important, of course, in the Pot 2 money,
That's
not
right,
so
the
much
Pot
in
2
the
and
Pot
3, because
1.
there's a big bunch of money there. We got to be in step there, and that's what I worry about versus more about our money, is how can we get that money?
So I
We're guaranteed to get our money.
That's right, we're guaranteed. I
We're
won't,
not
but
gonna
I
get
want
2 and 3
3.
if we don't have a more
Right,
reasonable
yeah, I
approach.
understand.
That's right.
But
You see what I'm saying?
That's where the Restore Act Committee, if it's the $30 million that's going to us, I think the citizens will want somebody that's answerable to the citizens to
That's right.
prioritize those. Now, the Pot 2 money, I could see the Restore Act Committee coming a lot more into
That's
play
right.
on that one.
That's right.
Our money right now is $2 million.
Right.
So then does that mean we got $28 million coming in 2 and 3? Is that,
No,
No,
two-
no.
2 and 3 are above that.
sorry?
Yeah.
2 and 3 are quite a bit above that.
The
Yeah.
30 million
They're not
strictly
coming to
within the,
us.
yeah.
Above
That's
the,
competitive, those are competitive plots that everyone
Okay.
goes.
You
after.
have to have regional projects to
Right.
get those.
It's
See, and
estimated
what-
30 million in the Pot 1, right? Pot 1's
30
already
million
estimated
belongs to
30 million.
Wakulla.
We
In
can
that
go
model,
buy 30
belongs to
new
Wakulla.
cars.
and then we bid on the other projects on above that.
Yeah, you're strategizing your best play in all of those.
So we have $32 million.
Potentially.
Right. 2 of it is already in the bank, and
Checks in the
30.
mail on the rest of it.
yeah, pretty much it's gonna be there. And I totally agree that we need to have on board a company like Drewberry in order to be in the game, so to speak. That's a bad terminology, but that's the facts of it. So I don't think we should be scrambling on our own. I think it's definitely a good idea going with a consultant. But to get my arms around what the county is going to actually be left with as far as its money for the projects, is it fair to say out of the, let's pretend $30 million, that there's $27 million that actually go to be spent on the projects?
I think it's going to be higher than that. But yes, sir, of that valuation, I would tell you you're going to spend 92 to 95%
Okay.
on the project.
Thank you.
What you're asking, not asking for, but what we're talking about at this point is the 350 figure you threw out to roughly do the plan would be paid for out of the $2 million. But as the aggregate of the total of $32 million, it's a smaller
It's a very small percentage.
I now understand. I talked to Jefferson County Commissioner today, and they said you presented to them
Yes, sir.
yesterday, and she was kind of complaining that they're only getting $400,000 this time, and you guys are asking for 350 of it. And I think I understand now because it's part of the larger
And
pot one money.
and so and I didn't get that chance yesterday. They apparently had an agenda issue. We'll get that chance in a couple of weeks. So and explain the process to them. You would appreciate then the other economies. There are aspects of this. It didn't matter if you're 10 times larger than Wakulla. I got to run the same gauntlet, and so you get huge economies, even larger when that's the case. But you can't forego.
What if there were, just theoretically, what if there were 5 or 6 counties that were going in together and hired your firm? Would they get any sort of discount?
Well, there's no doubt that there could have potentially been, there wouldn't be potentially, there would be some discounts we'd have to offer because there's some overlap and duplication we could eliminate. But when you get in to work in the county and you're doing the due diligence on your prior planning and we're making sure you're not backing up and duplicating that work, it's most largely confined to the county.
The reason I ask is I'm also on the Regional Planning Council, and that's 9 counties, and they're Bay, Franklin, us. So I might talk to them about maybe we could team up and.
Yeah, and you all
money.
in that particular regard are after like Amendment 1 and what have you. Yes, sir. There are clearly, especially structuring it from a blueprint that you're largely able to begin to define. We could find huge economies.
Let me ask one more time so that I get it in. We have $2 million in the bank.
Yes, sir.
But in part 1 we're going to get 30.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good enough. Then in 2 and 3 we bid on the projects with other counties and wherever.
We're going to navigate you into those projects. Sir.
Compete. Yeah.
Okay. Generally speaking, we have projects that we have chosen that would be good for 2 and 3.
And for which you would want to connect up to them and find them.
And not good for 1.
Sorry?
If they're good for 2 and 3, that inherently means they're not good for 1.
But we stand to get much, much more money
Yes.
than the $30 million.
It's like this, in pots 2 and 3, there's enough money that Wakulla County is qualified to get to make the entire coast an artificial reef. That's what you worry about.
All I can say is we're so very blessed.
Anyone.
Now that puts it in slap-choppy terms.
Yeah.
There's just shy of 100 counties across the
No
Gulf
offense,
region that
Laura.
are doing this. Any one of them that gets to the end zone and spent their money and that's what they got out of it failed.
What a blessing.
It's just really.
I think reason we bought these actually Preble Rich came in and introduced them to us, and they'll be working with Preble Rich and probably some other engineering firms, but this is also, as we said, Gulf County. But when they came and talked to Sheree and I, we were very impressed versus everything else that has been presented to us, if you know what I mean. This is the first real firm that stepped to the plate with real people that's worked in the federal government, in the federal bureaucracy, that comes to the table and is able to do what they say they're going to do, as well as these folks. You were number 2 in the Restore Committee for the consortium.
Yeah,
You're just
that's
a tiny percent off from getting the
a tiny immeasurable percentage. Yes.
from getting the consortium.
I'm not bitter.
That's right. Hey, I argued for you, so and I didn't even know you.
I'll ask you one more question.
Yes.
When it all washes out and we do all these projects, and let's just say it's $100 million. That's just pie in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
When we wash out, when you take the consultants and the tax tag and title and everything, generally what percentage does the tax tag and title and the sale of the vehicle cost?
I think you're going back against your even the valuation. If you extend over and get another in the model, you get another $70 million from the leveraging.
That's just
Yeah.
pie in the sky, but
No.
that's a good, easy, $100 million is an easy percentage I can work with.
100 million, this is what I would tell you, sir, and again, it's our professional expertise and background. We would hold any of the whole package of your outlays over and above the actual project level till 10% or less. So you'd be dealing with in that particular case, you'd be dealing with $90 million on the project.
So we get the project and, we get the project for 90 and the cost to do the project is, well, the accessory costs. to
Or
put
10%.
the project together and to consult it and all that.
Turn of dirt.
Will run 10%, so we got a 90-10 generally speaking.
Yeah.
Doesn't
and-
include engineering, I assume.
No, so that's what I'm saying. That's in your real project. You're gonna have to have preliminary designs, full designs. You have to have them approved. That's all part of the project. But your administrative overhead, the following the rules, staying between the lines, the audits, the reports, making sure none of those reimbursements come back to you.
Now, did you say Bay County just selected you?
No. Gulf County just selected us.
They do RFP?
They did. And they're just... So, we're having a workshop, being very honest. You're... Gulf County, Wakulla County, Jefferson County, these are small counties. Remember what I told you, there's a level of scale of work, doesn't matter if it's huge or small, it takes the same hide out of the process. There wasn't a lot of response to the Gulf County response. There wasn't a lot of response to the others. The market is not out there wanting to put its investment here, as evidenced by the response, right? I'm not trying to paint them with something, because it costs a lot to do this work.
Even the Gulf Consortium was only, what, 4 responses
Yes,
on
sir.
there?
Well, actually, it was higher than that, but you winnowed it down to the top
Yeah.
4. But the point is, there's not an overly enriched pool of people that have this background, and then to put them in the county and do the job that's got to be done in these small counties is not an easy proposition.
That's what I think.
We understand.
Aren't
it.
you also
So
with
how many-
Escambia as well?
Yes, sir, we are.
Escambia and Pasco,
Name,
right?
name all the counties that you already have a relationship with.
We are contracted in Escambia, contracted in Pasco, contracted in Gulf, and are teed up in, to be presenting just like this to Jefferson. And Walton's RFQ is either on the street or coming out, and as well as Franklin. And, it doesn't mean we're going to get them all, but we're going to be hard to beat.
You really should reach out to the council, I think, because like
Mhm.
I said, almost everyone you just mentioned is on that. And if there's a way these small counties can get together and
Mhm.
save on an economy of scale where you wouldn't need an individual office in each county, or you could share resources, we may even be able to save some money.
And we would be thrilled to help you do that.
I go right back to my question, I have to have it repeated 3 times.
Mhm.
So we got...
He's not lying either.
Watch out, Mr. Administrator. You got about 10% administrative,
Mhm.
and then we just get into regular bidding and operation
You're
costs
just,
to the project.
you're
Okay.
performing.
I
Now,
got it. I won't ask that question
Yep.
again.
but
More time.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
let's talk some numbers. Did you say that what you're proposing is 1.5% is what it would cost for you to administer the plan for us? Did I hear that?
No. So, well, yeah, but so let me back up. Let me put these numbers in compartmentalize them. And then I'm not going to go out of the boundaries. Cherie put those 4 options up for you.
Okay.
You know the piggyback arrangement has to be duplication of work. Your needs here are identical to Gulf's in every shape, fashion, and form. So I could look you in the eyes and say, without further ado, I'm going to have to run exactly the same process, soup to nuts, starting
We
in the
can
same
select
place.
you without an RFP if we choose that option.
That's $350,000.
That's $350,000.
Whatever that percentage is of
Right.
our $2 million.
If you go against the Transocean and the BP settlement gauge at 13.6, you'll find that to be just short of 1.2%. Okay? So that's where you hear that percentage come from me. Okay?
So the
But that's over and done
300,000
with.
comes just from the 2 million? Is that what we're saying?
Well, you have $2 million to expend against
Fine.
your money.
We could
You're
pay
just-
for it out of
You're taking
reserve
a
if we want.
withdrawal from your
Okay.
account.
You
to-
know, 3%.
Yeah.
So you're not basing this on the anticipated 30 million revenue. This plan would include all of it, but the 350,000 would pay for the entire
We're going to
plan.
build your plan at 30-some odd million. We're going to build the whole plan
Okay.
and the interconnect.
That's what I'm trying
So
to...
that's the 1.2%. You can just set that
Actually,
aside.
more than that, because you're going to include Pot 2 projects, too.
Yeah, when we leverage it up, it'll come down to less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
So, but I'm
What
just going
saying
at
is
the
your
base.
plan will not only include the 30 million we anticipate, but it'll include Tier 2 projects, too, that we have no idea at this point what their value was.
Yes, and so it works both ways. You would really not have any play in pots 2 and 3 if you did not know where Wakulla was. Not have a story to tell on Wakulla and why the connection points are with pots 2 and 3 and others we haven't even talked about, right? So you got to build the story in Wakulla and then make the connection on the leverage to where your point was, this is really bad use of pot 1 money. There will be occasions that's exactly true. given that you would have reach in pot 2, you wouldn't dump the capital that you have in pot 1 down there, but you have a blueprint. You have to have it has to be recognizable, has to be, you know, you got to be able to go to it. That's project 3. That's the evident, you know, damages to the springs or whatever it is. So, I mean, that's absolutely critical so that you can tell your story, or we'll call it a story. So that, and that's a one-time expense. Your multi-year implementation plan, when it's approved by Treasury, is yours. So when I said earlier, all right, Treasury, I'm ready to pull Project 5 down, it's against your approved plan. So now you're in the process of the harder work yet, and that is to life cycle a full project all the way from specification, procurement, all the way to closure. You're going to do those one at a time. And they have a fee basis in the background. You have 3% against the whole. You can manage against this whole life cycle in the county, and so that your county administration will manage that close, no question. But then you have an administrative, you know, you have an administrative overhead piece in each of the projects. So you're gonna that flow is going to come as fast as you're prepared to put the projects out.
It sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds similar to FEMA projects.
That's what we do. That's what my company does. It is almost identical to
So
FEMA.
you submit a PO or
project.
PW, and they'll approve it.
Mhm.
You have a certain amount allocated for overhead.
And you know,
Just give you $40 million to replace the culvert, and it inherently has everything built in there. You may only actually use $32,000 for construction, but if you...
and so what's the other part of that story? What happens to the ones that went outside the compliance of reimbursability? They want their money back.
Right.
Yeah. So
It's like a FEMA large project, almost.
there's a lot of parallels to it. Yes, sir.
On the advisory committee, do you have a recommendation how many people make a good advisory committee?
Asked this question last week. I would say 10 or less.
10 or less?
10 or less. And then we were asked if we would sit down and offer our, you know, based on some very quick evaluations with you, offer our perspectives of your stakeholder groups and what have you.
We could limit those, though, to only pot 2 and $3, and the board could decide what to spend the pot $1 on, because I think we, for the most part, agree we want to spend it on infrastructure.
You could look at it another way, if I may, and that is, you're going to do the right thing in the end. You want your county to understand that you're taking a best and highest use approach to the resources you have.
So you can use the advisory committee, or you cannot use them.
Well, what I was going to say is, if it were my county, that's how I have to answer these kinds of questions. If it were my county, I would absolutely employ the advisory committee. The advisory committee, I would presume, has not had this kind of consult about the whole structure and everything, and you want them to run parallel with you, find the same endpoints that you do, and so that when tested, you know, again, it represents the best and highest use, which it will, and everybody understands it. Not everybody, and that's going to be, you know, remember, unanimous consent is not the intent. Consent here, because you're not going to get unanimous on the time of day or the day of the week, you know, with everybody. But the point is, you don't want to. I'm just being honest with you. You don't want to pigeonhole the group that much. You want them to be with you. You want it to represent a long track. You can be on a long track. You know, there are conventional wisdom has it about 20 years to exhaust all the restore money. So you're going to want that imagery and all of that conscience to ride with you.
The advisory committee brings 10 points to us that they like.
Mm-hmm.
We say we only like 7 of them.
It's your decision.
We've
Never-
had a committee
never
for
leaves.
everything you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And some of them just don't work very good. You know,
Ye-
people either lose interest in it, and then you don't show up anymore, and the people that do show up are the ones that are highly motivated. They end up taking over control of the committee, and I don't know, if we're talking real dollars, we're answerable to the voters. They can come call us. They can't call and say, hey, the Restore Act committee put this project up here, we don't like it, and we can't say anything to them.
So I'm loving the conversation. It almost seems like I've gone to work for you about 1 hour ago, but
You're not billing us yet, though.
No, sir.
Okay.
But the process here, that being the case, or taken into the county, okay, you've now moved to where the game is very, very real. There are some resources immediately available to you. You have some on the plate, obviously. There's movement in pots 2 and 3. You've got to move this ahead. That group is going to go to work. It's not for fun and games. it's gonna shake out, some likely. I haven't met a soul except you, sir. I haven't met a soul on this committee yet, but it's gonna have a shakedown, because we've already seen that in the other counties. Oh, there's way too much work for me. I'm out of here, right? So it's gonna have a shakedown.
Guarantee
That's
it.
natural.
Mhm.
And I know we're trying to get to Mr. Boudreaux
Yes,
also
I'm
before
sorry.
we eat up all the time, but no, we appreciate it. But just, maybe if we can kind of roll this in. Let's say we pull the trigger and this board decides to hire you. What is the time frame to write the plan, and what level of input? How do we influence that plan? What are the steps that you need so you figure out what we want, what the board's priorities, and what the county's priorities
Yeah, I'm going to be
are?
very aggressive in this response.
Okay.
If you were to find your way to piggyback the golf contract and put us to work tomorrow, we'd be right back here to learn some of the aspects of what we need to answer your question. But I'm going to give you a relative range.
Okay.
It's been very comfortable, not comfortable to work in because we really press ourselves. But you're basically between a 14 and 16 month full run to network and be properly positioned. Does not keep you from working. In fact, we're working hard, about 12, 14, 16 months. If we find some shortcuts, we're going to take them with you, for you. But just don't want, to oversell and under-deliver.
Right.
So the timing is just that. We will roll in here right away. We are writing, if the scope, I'm feeling the scope is very, very spot on. If the scope is the same in Gulf County, then we're going to turn right back around and submit Gulf County's application for the planning grant money along with yours. Okay, so we're already in the 6-week window with Treasury for you to get your money to start the payment of us.
That's to draw off the $2 million to pay you.
Yes, sir. So
The right plan, right.
right. I don't like being down for 6 weeks. That's a long time in this process. There's a lot of moving parts and moving right now. Treasury has instituted a 60-day retroactive from the time that you start the planning grant process that they're going to award. They might nuance the language, but they're going to award the planning grant. Within the 60-day window, the efforts that have been undertaken at that point are reimbursable. We will work in that 60-day window beginning immediately with you, so you don't lose any time. But we're going to, if the county administrator, if we find some craziness with Treasury, the clock's running out, like in Gulf County, we're just going to get to that point and say, okay, well, we got to park it right here and wait for Treasury to finish its
Who do you
deal.
talk to in the county?
Beg pardon?
Who do you talk to in the county? Do we have these sessions?
So the presumption, again, in the models is we'll go to work for the county administrator.
Yeah.
The county administrator will always tee up the proper action for the county board. We have very specific we have very detailed scope of work. We have very specific milestones. We'll be working with the committee. The committee will be alongside the committee. We're usually reporting for the committee. We'll come to the county board. It's your business plan development. You'll know how good it is or bad it is at that point in time. Probably have some decisionable actions to help us make up some time or take advantage of the time we've already made up. But those kinds of things are very systematic in the reporting. We don't go away for a while.
And again,
Here.
going back to the CRTPA, that's the Capital Regional
Mhm.
thing, Anyway, they went around to all the counties and they formed an opportunity plan, which is they talked to everybody and said, give us all your crazy ideas you have, all right? And, it's hundreds of things. Sidewalk for every single street in the county. And then they go through and winnow that down to say, in his case, it would be like, this is more appropriate to pot 2, or this is more, this costs too much, or this is,
Yeah.
insane, or whatever. But you have for lack of a better word, a computer model, which is the criteria, which I assume you'd
We
want
would
this
develop.
board to select the criteria,
Yeah.
and the ranking system to assign to the criteria, I assume.
Correct.
That's where the big influence comes in
Yeah.
at.
Do you work
That's how I
with
got
the
319 on top
advisory
of the list.
committee? Do you meet with the advisory committee?
Oh yeah, they are so glad to see us. Yes, we are.
So every time they meet, do you meet?
Normally, we actually set their meetings because the advisory committees don't have a lot to do unless something's been done for them.
But they could simply
So
be
they
providing the
edit a lot.
things to go on the opportunity
Yeah.
plan. They don't necessarily have to rank them. They could
Yeah.
just say, here's some projects.
In that whole context of advising against what? So we give them we give them something stable to work from. I
Thank you.
cannot tell you how much, I really mean this, how much I enjoy an interactive workshop like this. They're not that easy to come by.
And again, I would highly recommend you reach out to Chris, who's the executive director of the planning council,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe set up to go
Meet with him.
present to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's there at one time. And then, Franklin County's doesn't always trust everybody, so if they have other people in their room that
Yeah.
they know, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Any
Thank
further-
you
further
so
questions?
much for your time.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Yes, Mr. Boudreaux is on deck, sir.
Is he from Plaquemines Parish? Who's roll?
Funny you mentioned that. So I do want, if you could all, after that, I know you're tired, close your eyes for a second, because this is what the challenge is going to be. Close your eyes.
Okay.
Indulge me. Every 45 minutes, we lose a football field worth of our land. That's what Plaquemines Parish is working on right now. And that's the kind of story that the Panhandle is going to have to be able to compete with in order to bring these competitive monies to our area. So to that end, a little bit of background on myself. I worked for DEP, don't hate me or shoot me, for 15 years. I was the assistant director when the oil spill hit. I ended up doing public meetings, worked with Scott Nelson over here in Wakulla during the oil spill, and then I spent 18 months in New Orleans as Florida's rep on Unified Command. The Nature Conservancy then hired me to work with local governments so that we can try to take this opportunity and leverage it into a life-changing legacy experience instead of just investing the money to get our short-term projects done, to really transform our communities to make them more resilient, both economically and environmentally. So I'm bought and paid for. So this is just to bring you up to speed on the work that we've been doing and how this could fit in with the work that you've been talking
So
about.
you're not here looking for money? that's
No,
what you're
sir,
saying.
absolutely not.
You're with the Nature Conservancy?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, basically, we talked about this, but I want to put some numbers to this. So you're getting your pot one, you've been talking about that. The pot two is the competitive pot that is out there right now that the Florida submitted 5 projects for and is under review right now. I'll get to that later. The pot three, of course, 23 counties in Florida will be splitting that money up. And then NIFWIF is $353 million. It's going to be coming to Florida. And FWC is going to determine how that money gets spent. And they've already started those projects. I think they're in this is the 3rd year. And I'll begin a little bit more on that later. And then natural resource damage assessment is going to be paying Florida back for the environmental and then the loss of use. Loss of use is, if you remember, we had to close fishing waters down during the spill. So BP has to compensate Florida for that lost opportunity of using the natural resource.
We've already got 2 narrative projects, right, Sherry?
Yes. So the challenge is, how do we, all this money can be coming to Florida, so how do we not only take that money and have the biggest bang for the buck and change for our community, but also then, how, as was discussed earlier by Brian, how do we leverage that to go after other federal grants like EPA 319 to fix stormwater and those type federal grants. So my whole premise of this presentation is going to be, we need, and if you look at this slide, this is where y'all get to laugh a little bit, hopefully, and levity up the room a little bit, but we have to make the links between all of these pots of money to make the greatest change. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. At least I got one in the room. So the idea here is how do we harness this opportunity? And Brian mentioned this earlier. The Gulf of Mexico program was the redheaded stepchild, and he did a great job trying to bring money into this. And when you look at the gross national product that the Gulf of Mexico provides to the U.S. economy versus the amount of money that's invested by the federal government into making sure it's healthy and productive, it's really a shame. Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay program get lots more money, and Brian can get into more details, but comparatively speaking, they get way more money than the Gulf of Mexico has. So the opportunity is, how do we leverage the restore and the BP oil spill to give the Gulf of Mexico its proper place in the rest of the United States and make sure that investments come to make sure it gets healthy, stays healthy, and is producing. So how we're going to do that, the Nature Conservancy, when I got hired a little over 2 years ago, the state of Florida said, okay, we don't know the definite plans yet. Treasury's writing the rules. What are we going to do? So they opened up a portal and said, give us your ideas. They ended up getting over, I think at this point it's over 1,300 project ideas, $16 billion worth of work. Now again, you're competing with someone that's saying every 45 minutes, I'm losing a football field worth of my property. You have to compete with that. So how do we as a state compete with that? You have to have context. So what we did, in the Southwest Florida, they have estuary programs, national estuary programs, and those programs were able to, their counties are a big part of those, and they already had priorities set, so they brought together the 3 planning, the NEPs, and came up with a list of strategic projects and prioritized them. And that went into the state portal. State loved that. because they already had this network of watershed communities, counties working together, and they knew what their regional priorities were. We don't have that in the Panhandle. We had no way of doing that. We haven't done that in the past. So what the Nature Conservancy did was we started watershed planning. And we identified, in the Panhandle, we have 5 watersheds. It's Perdido, Pensacola, Choctawhatchee, St. Andrew, St. Joe, and then the Apalachicola area. And so your staff has been working with us in Franklin County and Jefferson County and Gulf County, and we've been sort of doing, as Grover Robinson calls it, the poor man's NEP planning process. And so we've been bringing together the watershed groups and talking about what are the strategic issues facing our watershed. And then what are the root causes creating each of those issues? What are the major actions that are needed to fix those issues? And then what are the specific projects needed to implement them? We then got invited by Citrus, Pasco, and Hernando counties to go do the same thing for them because they didn't have that regional planning component. And so currently at this point we've been working with the 6 watersheds in Florida to do this work. So the priority issues were identified all 6 watersheds identified the same 4 priorities, which are improve coastal community resilience, protect and manage natural resources, improve the water quality, and then education and outreach. Those are the main themes that need to be addressed. Now, how each watershed needs to do it and what would the projects that will accomplish that are different for each watershed, but these are the major themes that each watershed is faced with. These are the major actions. I won't read through these, but basically it's how do we take our communities and our watersheds and make them more resilient, both economically and environmentally. And that means diversifying our economy. That also means protecting the reason that our current economy exists, which is a lot based on tourism and our water quality. And so those issues, again, in each of the watersheds, these are the major actions that will need to be accomplished. But again, as I just said, they're going to be tweaked for each particular watershed. Now, where we've come in the watershed planning process is we'll be releasing our first report coming out probably next month. They're actually being made to look pretty at this point. But these are the initial projects for this area. This is by no means a final list. What this was the initial list. What we did not want to do was recreate that 16 or 1,300 project, billions of dollars worth of work. We didn't want to just recreate that. We want to be strategic and focused on what is really the main needs for the area. This is what your cover is going to look like. We're hoping to have these released by the end of this month. And then the good news is, so limitations in our process was we did this out of hide. No one was paying us to do it other than Walmart, who pays my salary to come work with local governments. So one of the key things that we're missing was the science aspect. So we brought together stakeholders and we talked about it, but we weren't able to point back to scientific research and say, okay, based on water quality sampling, this is what's been identified. The Water Management District has a key component of that, and that's the Surface Water Improvement Management Plans. Are y'all familiar with those?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so they haven't been updated since they first came out, which is in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the state has now submitted in the Pot 2 proposal, they created an estuary program proposal, which was sort of carrying on the work that we've been doing, and it does 2 main things. It provides money to update the swim plans, and then it also puts $2 million per estuary into the design and implementation of priority projects. That has been submitted for Pot 2 funding. The other proposal that's been submitted, let me back up. So going back to the FWC and the NIFWIF money, the $353 million, the state of Florida has submitted an off-cycle funding request to develop a plan on how to spend the NIFWIF funds. In that proposal, they've also carved out the swim plan updates that was submitted for the Pot 2 funding. They've carved that out and put that into the NIFWIF planning grant as well. So chances are, whether Pot 2 gets funded or the NIFWIF, the swim plans will be updated. The good news is that's going to provide that critical science that we need to make sure the prioritizing that we do and projects we identify are based on science-based. And you'll hear a lot of that in the whole restore. It's got to be science-based. So that's great news. EPA submitted a Pot 2 proposal to create estuary programs where there are currently no NEPs. And that's pretty huge for this area. And that's hopefully where our work will merge into. So we're going to come out with our first round of the report probably in this month. What we're hoping is that EPA's proposal to create estuary programs will be funded. In their proposal, when we first talked with them last November, it was going to be a competitive process. When it came out and they actually submitted it, they identified 12 estuaries that they want to create estuaries programs for. 6 of them are in Florida. All of the Panhandle are covered, and then the Big Bend area. What that will do, what they'll fund, is the creation of a committee or a council, which is really, really important. I want to stress this. If EPA's proposal gets funded, it starts at local government. You are the core of an estuary program. It has to be driven by local government. That's where the rubber meets the road. So under the estuary program model, a council will be, and Brian, you may want to help me on this. It's a governing council? Management council. And that has counties as members. It also has the water management districts, DEP.
It already exists. The Regional Planning Council has a water management district on it and DEP on it.
I'm glad you said that. So in the Pensacola and Perdido Bay watersheds, they are Santa Rosa, City of Gulf Breeze, City of Milton have all put forward resolutions supporting the estuary program creation, and they are proposing to use the Regional Planning Council as that core entity. So I'm glad you mentioned that's perfect. I didn't know you were going to tee that up for me. I appreciate that.
No problem.
So if that gets funded, EPA will stand up these councils, and then they'll pay for the development and adoption of a watershed plan for that estuary. And then that will then, the end product of their funding will be the adoption of that plan, which then that plan can then used to go after these funding sources. And then you'll have a science-based component to it. It'll be a plan that's had federal, state, and local members developing it. So that's good. What we're going to do to try to help move that forward is on June 10th, we're going to be holding an estuary workshop where we've invited EPA to come talk about what they submitted. We've invited Holly Greening with the Tampa Bay NEP program and Roberta Swan with the Mobile Bay NEP program to come and talk about what that has done for their communities, what the value has been, and any lessons learned. So if EPA's program gets funded, then how can we do it to learn from their lessons? So June 10th, hope y'all can participate. It'll be in Walton County. And one last thing. So depending on how meetings go, I like to warp y'all a little bit as much as I've been warped. So take a look at the Gulf of Mexico, and then look at the cute little dog right below it. My hope today is that you will never again look at the Gulf of Mexico without seeing that dog, because it haunts me. So, I know I breezed through that. I was trying to give y'all a breathing break before your commission meeting, but if y'all have any questions, be more than happy to answer.
It's like the fruit, the vegetable shakes from the Great Lakes.
Exactly. Or Winnie the Pooh for down the Lake O. Yes.
Everybody loves Winnie the Pooh mentioned before me.
I thought it was like E.T.
His finger?
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
All right.
We
Thank you, Darryl.
appreciate it. What's next?
It's up to you now.
You need some board direction at this point.
Yep. We're a couple things. We'll bring back to you if it's okay with you guys, an agenda item for contract services. And a program to do that, and we'll have some options for you, but one of those would be Dewberry, and then others put out an RFQ and ask you guys what you want to do. Either contracts directly with Dewberry or not. The other one is we're going to need shortly be bringing an agenda item for Bucket 1. We're going to need to make some decisions as to how do we want to use Bucket 1 money. Put it out into the private sector, or we want to keep it in the county for county infrastructure, planning, etc.
Like Howard said, even if we don't pick these guys, we know we're going to spend probably $350 of that $2 million on a consultant.
That's
to
right.
develop a
We
plan.
know a piece of that's got to go towards consulting and planning.
You said you need to know from us about Bucket 1, whether we want to keep it in the county or...
That's going to be a recommendation that we'll be bringing that to you guys, and what the
You know what I
phase one.
think. I think I said
I know. We got to formalize. We're going to need to formalize that. The other is another agenda item will be Revise and Restore Act Advisory Committee ordinance responsibilities, and what that would be if we wanted to, if you guys said, okay, for right now, pot 1 is we understand what we want to do with pot 1. Now pots 2 and 3, if you want, do you want the Restore Act Committee to work with pots 2 and 3, or just whatever direction you guys want on the Restore Act Committee?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Give us some recommendations. If you
we
will.
will.
Mainly, the biggest problem with the ordinance as it's written now is it's so restrictive. It's like they're being directed at every meeting, you gotta do this, 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 and this. We need to open the ordinance up and revise it and give them a little more flexibility.
Do you think it would be smarter for us to get a consultant on board that could tell us what the best way to set the committee up would be instead of just doing it now?
I think that's an excellent idea.
And I know we have a lot to digest. We've got a lot of information here, and we'll probably have more questions than we've had answered so far. But I'd just like to throw out that Dewberry went to the second pick with the Gulf Consortium, 27 counties, I think. It's a very exhaustive process, and so, you know, I would certainly give that some credence that they've already been kind of ran through the mill, and we see that they're being selected in other areas. And so, you know, I think we're not just picking someone that just showed up today to do this job. And so I would definitely lean that
But
direction.
I'd be interested in if there's any cooperation between other member counties, at least in the region, if we can pool our and maybe get it a little cheaper.
Well, I think like saying, the problem is, these don't have to judge each. I think where the economies of scale will come is in pots 2 and 3 working regionally.
I agree.
That's where that's going to come in. But doing county by county still has to do the same task, and it just can't. You know what I mean? They have to do. So I understand that part. But I think our vision is on the regional stuff. That's where we're really going to see the discount.
Part of what they're supposed to provide us, though, is ideas for pots 2 and 3 or whatever. And if they were already retained by several counties in the area that could team together, it'd make their job a lot easier.
Well,
If they work for us and Franklin County and Gulf County, then they could say, here's an idea that'll help all 3 of your counties, and we'll submit it.
I don't think we should start off trying to learn how to be a consultant or how to set this thing up, because we're amateurs. I know that I'm an amateur on this, so basically I need good advice. So I think we ought to start from the very start with good advice and avoid mistakes that I would not even know about.
thank you,
I will
John.
agree with that. You know, being from serving the time that I did on the Restore Act Committee, it would be very good to have the guidance then, because most of our meetings was trying to guess what the Treasury rules were going to be before the Treasury rules came out. And we put together something, and then whenever the Treasury rules came out, what we had put together didn't fit no more. So it would be good. I'm all about having
We
Dewberry.
need to start from day one with good advice, not get it after we've made mistakes.
Somebody wake Nicole up.
Let me say one thing at the statewide level. For the Gulf Consortium, there were only 6 proposals statewide. 3 of them were just so bad that they just didn't get any consideration. And Dewberry was in the top 2, and it was like a hair was all it was. And so I have a lot of confidence that this group will bring to this board what you're looking for.
So what is the reason of not hearing for the number 1?
I did not invite them. They did not reach out to this county with any interest.
Did the number 1 group, have they been selected by any other county besides the consortium as a whole?
Not to my knowledge.
Could we even piggyback on a bid for the consortium, or does it have to be a government county?
I would have, the RFP was done by Leon County, so I believe that possibility is there. But honestly, from what I've seen, I don't know if they would even have the capacity to do the statewide and work with counties.
Well, they didn't bid on a county's work anyway.
No,
right?
sir.
Okay.
They're going to probably have their hands full. I think they're looking at a 2-year lead time to implement the Gulf Consortium's plan.
And because the Gulf Consortium plan is different, it's a statewide implementation plan where we're doing a multi-year plan. I'm not so sure that everything in the RFQ for the Gulf Consortium would translate to a county.
Just real quickly, if you guys had gotten the Gulf Consortium, would you be here today?
I was going to answer for the...
Paul said no. I got you.
I think you set yourself up for a conflict. Very
Good. That answers that.
Get it on the cone?
Take public comment.
Anything further? Public comments, anyone like to, we've got about 8 minutes. Anyone? If you would come up to the microphone, Jim, and when you're done, if you'll fill out a speaker card for me.
I think it's real important that we reach out to Franklin County, tell them which way we're leaning, and see what they have to say. So basically, that's it.
And I'm guessing that Dewberry is probably gonna bid that RFP as well. Okay.
Again, I would talk to the council.
Jim, if you will, fill out a speaker's card for me, if you don't mind. Anyone else? Public comments? Further discussion? Motion to adjourn?
There you go.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.